Good afternoon, Indiana Kentucky Conference. My name is the Reverend Chad Abbott, and I am the conference minister for Indiana Kentucky. It is so great to be with you here on this noon hour. We've been doing this now for, I think 7 or 8 straight weeks, going through the Revolutionary Love project wheel that Valerie Kaur put together in her book, See No Strangers. And Valerie is a unique person. She's a Sikh woman. She was someone who did a documentary in the wake of 9/11 on how particularly Middle Eastern folks were being treated, and has really garnered a sense of voice around how we deal with relationships and peace and justice. And she was one of our keynote address speakers at our last General Synod this July, and I have with me today a guest who was also at that same General Synod, one of our Synod delegates, Lakota Iron Rope. Lakota, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Lakota Iron Rope. I am from St. Paul's UCC in Evansville, Indiana. I am involved with the local church and conference in several different ways. Like Chad mentioned, I have been a voting delegate for the last 2 synods. I look forward to next synod in Indianapolis, really
Yay.
excited. But I'm also really involved with Miriam Camp and Retreat Center, and heavily involved in my local church. So I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, we're so glad to have you, and wonderful to have your voice. You always contribute so much to the Synod experience, but also just having conversation with you. So it's good to be with you today, Lakota. And we are going to be talking today about the word breathe. We've dealt with like six or so other words in the other parts of the wheel. And these 3 wheels focus on particular relationships: the relationship with the self, the relationship with others, and relationship with opponents. And the last part of the wheel we were focused on where it was opponents, and this part of the wheel is actually focused on the self. And so we're starting with this word breathe, which is an action, an activity of spiritual practice, but also revolutionary resistance towards systems of oppression. And so we think about ways in which we engage this word breathe. I want to share with us a video from Valerie's Revolutionary Love website. So just give me a brief second here to get that up, and we will get that moving.
This is how I am defining what it means to breathe. Breathing is the practice of taking conscious, deep breaths. It is also the act of creating enough space in your life to slow down and care for your body, your mind, and your spirit. Are you breathing today? Are you breathing this moment? Are you breathing before the next push? Is another way to ask yourself, are you putting life and wellness into your body? I want to spend a moment thinking about the literal act of breathing. When we breathe in, we're giving our body what it needs. When we exhale, we send out what we no longer need. When we pay attention to the in and out, the let it come and the let it go, when we pay attention to that kind of rhythm, our minds are called to the present moment. Not the past, not the future, just here and now. Let it come, let it go. Breathing creates the space and time to be present. Present to emotion, present to sensation, present to surroundings, present to one another, present to ourselves.
So, Lakota, there's a lot there in that video clip about the act of breathing. It is obviously a breathing in and kind of acceptance, but also a breathing out, which is a kind of a letting go act. And this the act that she describes. What she says is it's creating space for lots of things, and she named several of them: the present moment, for relationships, for ourselves, for healing. This seems like the really important revolutionary love act as a part of this wheel, because we've been talking about all of our relationships with each other, but this particularly is about a relationship with ourselves. So let's talk a little bit about breathing. What do you get from her video?
So when I watched this video, it actually reminded me, I had a professor that would have the class do breathing exercises at the start of every lecture, and especially so before an exam. And it's because research supports that the physical act of breathing, and more specifically intentional breathing, impacts our lives in a lot of different ways, including our mental and physical health, but also bringing a more intentional aspect to our day-to-day physical being. And I feel like what I get from that is there is a lot that can benefit us if we take that time to be intentional and focus in on our physical selves and really focus on that breathing.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think I found so meaningful about what she said, about what you're saying here, is there's an intentionality to that breathing, and the intentionality is this: like there's a past, and there's a future, and all breathing really does is invite us not to either one of those, but to the moment that is right in front of us. So when you're dealing with matters of systemic injustice, or you're dealing with a test even, or you're dealing with somebody who you're in relationship with, it could be a sibling or a parent or a neighbor, somebody who's your neighbor, to actually put the past behind you, the whatever might happen in the future, leaving that out of the picture, but simply being present. I think the breathing brings us into that being present to one another. We live, Lakota, I think, in such a society that we forget breathing. We forget to be present to each other, and and I'm guilty of this, but I mean, we're so glued to our devices, and I'm not blaming all of our social ills on devices, but there's something about presence that only something like breathing can do for us, right?
I really feel like breathing lifts the weight of, like you said, the past, worrying about the past or worrying about the future. It roots you down into the spot that you're in right now. And it's almost like a release, if you will, of let's focus on the here and now. Who am I with right now? What am I doing right now? Or even thinking of how can I be with myself in this moment? And it's like a weight off of your shoulders.
Well, I was
to have
thinking
to let go.
Yeah, right. I was thinking of that word release, and that the image that you just gave is what I was thinking of, like the idea of letting go, because the release. One of the things she says in her wheel is that there are words that are very difficult words in there, like at least one in each section, like rage, for example, or fight, or in this part of the wheel it'll be push. So all of those words, I mean, they're not necessarily all negative, but they certainly have an edge to them, right? And some of that edge can linger. So like rage, for example, she talks about having a healthy balance of rage. It is not healthy to constantly barrage people with your rage, but it's also not healthy to hold it in and never allow it to speak truth. And so somewhere in the middle is the present moment, right? And the releasing of our need to rage at the world, or our need to hold on to resentments or fears or whatever it is that holds us back, allows us to be present to this moment, which can create a new future. Sometimes we write our own future by living in the past and holding on to things. So your idea of releasing is really that's powerful. That's powerful. Yeah. You work with kids a lot, right? I mean, you're going into a field in psychiatry to work with kids, but you also work with kids at Miram camps, and like you've done this for years. So like talk to me a little bit about what is it like breathing and being present with young people.
So this is actually something that we kind of focused on at camp this summer, but it's a really interesting experience with taking the time with children or adolescence, and being intentional about taking that moment to breathe, to pause, to reflect. Especially working with children and adolescents who come from a lot of different walks of life, have a lot of different life experiences and home lives, and et cetera, et cetera. Being in such a intentional environment where we take the time to pause. And I think it's such a powerful moment, because a lot of times, and especially with these past few years and the tolls that it's taken on our children and our adolescents, it's really powerful to take that pause, and they're allowed to take that pause. I think a lot of children and adolescents don't get that intentional time to pause and breathe and reflect on whatever it is that they need to reflect on or breathe on. I mean, just this summer we had a camper that we had a intimate one-on-one moment of, let's sit down, let's listen to some music, and let's just breathe. And afterwards, I don't want to get emotional here, but it was just a very powerful moment to have with that child that needed that, that didn't get that moment to just be with themselves.
Yeah, most of our society doesn't.
In a safe environment with safe adults that care about them.
Right. And most of our society doesn't create the kind of safe space for any of us, let alone teens or kids, to do that kind of sacred pausing. I think, one of the things I've noticed in some of the anti-racism work that I've been working on over the last several years is it's part of white supremacy to actually always be working, always be producing, always be doing something, as if that were our identity, right? And I think the pause that you're referring to, the sacred pause, the really be intentional with listening and just breathing, it is revolutionary, as Valerie says, mostly because what that says to the machine of constantly doing, constantly producing, and achieving is it's a no. It's no. My identity is not wrapped up in that. It's wrapped up in something much larger, in the kingdom of God. It's a pretty beautiful way of describing. I love how you describe it with that child, because obviously they too know what it's like to never be provided that space. So I'm grateful for you providing a space for someone who could really need a safe space to do that. So why don't you? We're at the end of our time, but I wondered if you might just share. If there, kind of any last words of wisdom around this word breathe before we close.
Something, I know we have talked more so about the physical act of breathing and breathing exercises, and I want to encourage folks to take that moment. But I also want to emphasize the importance of the metaphorical breathing of, we talked about how this society and the systems that, we're a part of really pushes for that productivity and the go, go, go and the hustle mentality. And I want to remind folks that breathing is not only a physical act, but also a metaphorical act of, which I suppose is still physical, of sometimes take that break. Take the time to maybe do something that you really enjoy. You're breathing and taking time away from that constant productivity and the constant output of material, if you will.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a spiritual act, right? For sure. It resets us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lakota, I want to thank you for spending time today with me on our live on our Facebook page for the Indiana-Kentucky Conference. And friends of the Indiana-Kentucky Conference, we have yet another wonderful General Synod delegate who shared with us in a word. And next week we will have another delegate where we will focus on the word push. And we're almost getting to the end of the inside of the wheel before we get to the last word on the outside of the wheel, which is joy. So we're coming nearer to the end of our time, but thank you for being with us here each week at the noon hour. Look forward to seeing you all next week.